Hello and welcome to another Madaxeman List Special podcast. This is an ADLG version 4 special, and it's even more special because we're looking at lists which have been used in an actual competition. So from the 3T's in York, which happened quite recently, we're looking at the lists in the top 3 places, and then also another couple of lists which the three of us also used as well. So you're looking forward to seeing Bosporans, Thracians, Late Imperial Romans, Parthians, and also the Nobades, Blemi and Nobades, but definitely the Nobades, which I think we all know by now won the list. So sit back as I'm joined by the regular contributors Dave and Richard for another ADLG List Pod.
This means war.
Well, look, welcome everybody to another, although very different, I guess, from the last 18 months, Army List special podcast. And we're going to be looking at 5 podcasts with our regular 2 guests, Richard and Dave here. But the unique thing about these, I think possibly unique since we started doing these, is we're looking at 5 lists that have actually been used in a real competition on the tabletop. And we sort of know how well they performed as well. So the competition in question was the 3T's up in York, the first ADLG competition since lockdown kind of stopped in the UK. And the list that we're going to be looking at are the top 3, and then also another couple of lists from the 3 of us. And the mathematically inclined amongst you will realise that probably means that one of the 3 of us finished in the podium positions and the other 2 didn't. And so that does mean we've got quite an eclectic range of lists to look at as well, which should make it interesting. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. We're not necessarily going to chat about the competition itself. That's probably for another podcast. But this is just really digging into the lists that were used, whether they worked, how they worked, what we think of them, and again, our second ever podcast on version 4 lists as well. So without further ado, we will start at the lowest final place list, which is mine, which was a Thracian list. Now I've got this up on screen for the guys to share here, and I think both of you have played against it in a practice game as well. The way the list was put together, across the 3 commands, I ended up with one command which was sort of designed to sit on a flank and neutralize or beat other people's mounted commands. And this was a Roman type period. So my theory was the mounted commands wouldn't necessarily be that strong. And that was 2 elite heavy cavalry nobles, 1 medium cavalry, 2 light cavalry javelins. So you've got a 5 wide stretch out to the flank, probably a bit better or as good as most other people's cavalry thing there. And then my usual trick of 2 heavy spearmen hoplites. These are the mercenaries that are allowed in the Adrician Thracian option. A javelinman, really, because you do sort of feel like you need someone else there. Whether a javelinman's the right thing is a question. And a light infantry javelin to screen the hoplites. The second command was the main one, really, a brilliant general, because you only get 3 command points in the Thracians. The first one had competent. 5 warriors. I went for the medium swordsman turned cutter. That's the Thracians trick, so why not do it? This sort of half-hearted other cavalry wing, 1 medium cavalry, 2 light cavalry javelin, then 2 javelin men just to break it up a bit, give you a bit of shooting from the 5 medium swordsmen, and a light infantry javelin and a light infantry slinger. And then in the final command, which is where I stuffed the 4 permitted elite hillmen that you can have in the Adrician list without taking an ally. So I dithered about taking those as impetuous foot, but in the games that I tried it, they'd just been too difficult to control. So I took them as medium swordsman elite, which gave me 9 of the medium swordsmen, a saving, I guess, of 9 points on version 3. So 1.5 of those were free. 10th, another medium swordsman to make this command up to 5, just to make it a little bit wider, and a light infantry slinger to screen them as well. And it ended up, slightly above mid-table, but obviously struggled quite a lot against Cataphracts over the course of the competition. But you guys have both played it. I certainly found it an interesting list to use, and I suspect I was getting better at it by the end. But whether it was whether it was genuinely competitive, I'm not sure. Whether it was just giving my my opponents interesting challenges. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think you've already mentioned, it's probably its biggest Achilles heel, which is, it's really going to struggle against cataphracts, and in a competition where there's always going to be quite a few armies which have 6 or 8 cataphracts. That gives you a big section of the table that it's hard for this army. Even if you manage to sucker them into a pocket and hit them on the flanks, medium swordsmen are a base factor of 0 against cataphracts. So even hitting them on the flanks, it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think that was the thing. Even when you did start to overlap them, you can neutralize the armor with the medium swordsman, but you just spend all your points just running away from cataphracts. Where there was a couple, I felt I could kind of deal with them and stick something in their face. But I did wonder about my big question on it was always that the medium cavalry and the 2 light cavalry on the, let's call it the opposite flank to my anti-mounted flank, where there's usually quite a lot of terrain, or that there's not usually 2 open flanks on a table, the way the terrain kind of falls. And I did wonder, I came out of the competition wondering whether those 3 things might have been better sort of being swapped out for medium spears and just make it a we're going in terrain, and medium spears are my answer to mounted option. But I didn't see too many medium spears in the competition, but they might have been better than that other thing that sort of gave me a command and control challenge, because they always had to have their own pips and find some empty space on a bit of table where normally the rest of the command was looking for terrain to hide in.
I wonder though, I think you can have 4 medium cavalry in that list.
Yeah.
And I would almost be tempted to go the other way and have all 4, only because of cataphracts. And this was a roughly 200 to 375, 200 BC to 375 AD competition. So, mostly the mounted you're facing are cavalry and cataphracts. And because the medium swordsmen have a base factor of 0 against cataphracts, and the medium cavalry have a base factor of 1, if you can, but the medium swordsman can run away at 3 from the cataphracts. If you've got 3 or 4 medium cavalry hanging around to hit the side of the pocket, it's much more of a threat. And so the cataphracts don't want to pursue you as much. And that allows you more time to beat up the rest of his supporting forces. And I've been looking at this quite a bit myself in list design, because they're so cheap at 7 points. As long as you've got something in front of them to screen them from bow fire, I think they can be more useful sometimes than a medium swordsman, particularly now that they're effectively +2 if they hit something on the flank.
Yeah,
I think it's something worth considering for a mainly medium foot army.
Yeah, actually, it may well have been that the 2 light cavalry were the problem. That they just didn't really have a role. I'm trying to think whether there's 6 cavalry allowed, and I've already upgraded 2 to the noble elite, or whether the list just has 4 cavalry.
I think in the Thracians, 2 nobles plus 1 to 4 mediums.
Okay, so there's possibly a couple more mediums. So maybe even go the other way then. And Dave, you played this again, and what are your thoughts on it?
The version you used when we played, you didn't have the spearmen, the hoplites. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah,
I think it does stiffen it up quite considerably.
Yeah, I did find myself wondering whether even having the hoplite ally, just to get even a few more of them, might have, to have 4 or 5 might even have been a better option, or a different. Well, no, it would have given it a different dimension. And then the obvious other way is to go really late and have the Romans. But I just wanted to put a lot of Thracians on table with this one. So
go Thracian.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the Roman ally is just a bit of a dither, isn't it? And it's an expensive dither, which is going to suck up a lot of points getting those legionaries into the army.
The problem with the Greek ally is you can't have the 2-handed weapon medium sword, because you can only have the ally before 357.
Oh, right. Oh, so that's a no-no then. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a bit of a problem. That means you're taking not even the Thracian army. You're just taking what, normal swordsmen?
Yes.
Yeah. You'd have to be quite brave to take that then. I'm probably not that brave.
You'd end up with the impetuous elite instead of the.
Yeah, and they were just too hard to control. Okay. So I don't know if it's
with this list would be to have. I'd be tempted to do what you did with the Gallic army, the Galatian army, and put all the cavalry together into one wing. Where you're right, in this competition, other than the Cataphracts in mass, most of the other opponents aren't going to. Although we'll see Richard's army's got a lot of cavalry in it. No, against the Roman army, the Romans are only going to have 4 cavalry. So I think you could. My temptation is always to have a cavalry wing and try and secure the other wing with medium foot. It can go wrong. It did go wrong in this competition. But I'd hope to, and that way you can mass the cavalry and that way you can pin them and slip past them somehow. So
I think that's maybe the takeaway, isn't it? It's not always necessary to have cavalry on both wings. Because if you end up with a penny packet, particularly with this list, you so much wanted a lot of terrain that one wing always could be covered by terrain in itself. And then the cavalry actually struggled to find space to operate. Or certainly the light cavalry struggled to find space to operate. So it's not necessarily thinking as a cavalry wing. It's thinking of the medium cavalry as a shift one or two of them over to strengthen the other cavalry wing and make that absolutely dominant, or keep a couple as reserves and gap fillers and flank hitters to exploit something, rather than just seeing it as a kind of skirmishing cavalry wing, because there's possibly other ways of doing that.
And maybe putting, if you've got the 4 light cavalry javelin together, they become a real exciting entity in themselves, especially with the new pinning rules, which Julian used to very, very good effect. I've learned something very, very powerful this weekend.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, look, that's the Thracians then.
This means war.
So look, second list, and again, a quiz for the mathematically inclined. The fact that we're working upwards and then we're going with Dave's, it's probably given away that Richard ended up troubling the engravers this weekend. But Dave, you were one of the many people who took Roman lists in this Romany type period. And I guess a lot of them were all about integrated light artillery being the new toy. But you took the late imperial Roman list and even shoehorned a strategist into it and got it up to a reasonable size. So, talk us through this. Run us through what's in each of these commands.
Well, I think with the late Roman army, you've got all the toys you could ever want. You've got the legionaries, elite, in any format you want, whether you want them with rear support or armor, whatever. You've got cataphracts, you've got heavy cavalry, impact, you've got excellent medium foots. The issue really is which toys do you take in which combination, and how do you pay for it? The issue I find with this army is the late Roman is you're only allowed 2 legionaries elite, you're only allowed 2 cavalry elite. So it's not a case of like how are you going to shoehorn and where you're going to give yourself the impact. The cavalry wing I've got there, I found wasn't powerful enough on repeat.
So you had a heavy cavalry impact elite with a general.
Yeah.
You had a heavy cavalry impact elite, so 2 of those, 2 heavy cavalry just vanilla, 2 light cavalry javelin and a light cavalry bow. So that's 4 wide of heavy cavalry, and 2 of them are about as pointy as it gets.
Yeah, I think if you're going to my latest version of these, I think if you're going to go with light horse and cavalry together, you need to have at least 3 light horse. And again, the late Roman list is limited to 2 light cavalry javelin, or else I'd have gone with 3. So the bowman's in there to make that. I think 2's fine, but you'll get overwhelmed by someone else. And then the issue I had was the heavy cavalry at the moment really suffer against light horse. If you fight a light horse javelin, If you take a hit from shooting against light horse and then charge into a light cavalry javelin, you're fighting on evens. And as Julian demonstrated, he 6-1 me and killed me. He shoots me with one
Okay.
action.
So the downside of this army is it's susceptible to 6-1s, right? I'm not sure I'm buying that as a thing. So your cavalry wing you think's a bit light. Then you've got your gut moving up the page. You've got your auxiliary wing, which is 3 auxilia. You've got one with an embedded general. Wow, wait, you're in who's elite. You've got another one who's elite, and then you've got another one who's vanilla, and then a couple of bowmen as well. So it's 5 strong. 3 of them have got impact. 2 of them are elite. 2 of them are bowmen. So because that's either very strong. Well, I guess that's very strong against some armies. But I'm thinking my Thracians would love to meet that, but that's what they were sort of designed to do.
Well, what I wanted to do with that, I mean, I wanted some flexibility. If there was a wing which was terrain based, that could hold as a terrain wing. But in actual fact, I want that command as much as possible to work with the cavalry. And I want to use the pips from that command to get the bowmen round the cavalry and do my usual trick of getting them onto the wing to support the light horse if possible. That didn't come off really at all in this competition. I just didn't have the pips. The 3 auxilia in themselves are quite powerful, especially 2 of them elite. One
with the general, yeah.
One. I think this list is wrong. It was competent his own. Don't worry, he wasn't a general. But
he wasn't included. Okay, all right.
Yeah, they could actually combine with the legionaries or combine with the cavalry. So I'm trying to give myself flexibility. So where you got the first command, you've got 4 legionaries, 2 cataphracts. That gives you 6 wide. If you can find yourself a situation where you want to extend the width with the medium infantry, that can make you 9 wide, which I think is really effective.
9's starting to be a big number, isn't it? Yeah.
I think the idea of the army was to have flexibility. The cataphracts could move to support the cavalry to make yourself 6 cavalry effectively, or you could keep the cataphracts with the legionaries. Against the Sassanids, it did well, apart from some bad dice. It didn't do so well against the other Romans because the other Romans I found were armoured and things like that.
They just went big on the Roman thing. Yeah. So how did the light artillery do? Because you had 2 of them. They're the cool new toy that everybody's excited about, and 2 of them. I'm wondering if you, in the light of day, having used them 5 times or 7, 8, 9 times with practice games. What's your thoughts on 2 integrated light artillery now? Is that an auto pick, or is that an auto drop, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, considering they reduced the enemy to 0, you think they'd be hitting more often than not, but they aren't. No. And I think that was just a factor of bad dice rolls. They do become a bit of a liability where you get into combat and you have to leave them behind, and you're trying to use pips to manoeuvre them the way. So they can end up being 4 easy points for an opponent. I think I'd take 1 just to give the threatening fear to the cataphract opponents and things like that. The only thing they achieved in this competition was shooting one of Julian's medium foot dead. Right. And I think
it's not a great return on 14 points or 18 points, 16 points or something, is it?
They're 7 points each. I think, to be honest, I'd have dropped one of them, use the points for rear support for the auxilia probably. Rear supporting the auxilia gives them a bigger chance of surviving in the open against mounted. I think that's a really good way of using those points. And getting that, squeezing another auxilia Susa Commentatis, the medium sword mediocre in for 4 points would be really handy.
Okay. Richard, what's your thoughts looking at this one?
Yeah, I do think that under version 4, all the Romans are a lot more playable. They certainly would have been. One of the fun things about this competition is only 2 players could have each army, and I was too late in making my choice. But otherwise, I would have gone for one of the later Roman armies, I think. So I do think that they're excellent. And I do think for the first time, legions are much more playable against almost any opponents. The bigger change for me, the integrated light artillery is nice, but it's the missile support removing mounted furious charge, it is a really good play balance change in the rules. And I certainly found all the Romans I played very, very difficult to attack with a cavalry army as opposed to a cataphract army. So I do think it's worth thinking about having the legionaries armored. Yes, doesn't make any difference against cataphracts, but as Dave found out, most other heavy infantry are not armored, and so it really gives you an edge, and it also makes them much tougher against skirmisher and mounted bow shooting. So you're not spending points on a Lightfoot screen in the same way as you might have to if you don't go for the armor. So I think my view is you start with the legions and you aim to win with the legions, and the cataphracts are very useful. Again, I think if you're only going to take two, it's worth making them elite, and then it's having two other commands which are there to deliver your main blow, rather than expecting to. It's the exact opposite of other armies where you might expect to win on the wings and hold in the center. I think with the Romans, you expect to smash through in the center and the wings support the center. But that would just be my take. And because I think so often, as I think Dave was saying, he found his mounted command isn't quite good enough against dedicated people with mounted commands, and so you've spent a lot of points, but you still don't have that edge that you need to win in a mounted combat. So
I think so, certainly I found, looking at that mounted wing compared to my mounted wing, the fact that heavy infantry can now move 3 means you can get 2 or 3 heavy infantry up to support a mounted wing pretty quickly, and then your 4 heavy cavalry here, if 2 of them are neutralized by enemy heavy infantry, you're only playing with 2 really, and suddenly it does start to look a bit lightweight. So you are a bit neither fish nor fowl. I think there's some really interesting stuff about rear support, making the auxilia something that can actually have a proper old go in the open. And that idea of I'm trying to think how many Roman armies I played. I played one triumvirate Roman and then a Palmyran sort of pseudo Roman army. And the ones that went big on Roman troops, there is just a real quality all of its own of just a big old line of legionaries. It really is a proper thing, but it seemed much more effective than maybe it had done in the past. So interesting. And interesting stuff on light artillery. I'm not sure many people came out of it going, brilliant, I definitely need to use 2 in every competition. And the point about how they end up almost being targets when that first line starts to go down, they're like dragging your camp with you in a way, which you probably wouldn't do if you think about it like that.
And don't deploy with your light artillery in a field, because they only go one.
And I think having 1 probably is worth it, but they only hit on 15 out of 36 times, and if the other person is elite, they're hitting only 10 out of 36.
It's not going to win the game, is it? No.
It isn't. And I definitely think, except against very specific people, I think 1's enough.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, look, that's the Romans done.
This means war.
So then we're into the top 3, and we're into Mr. Case. So you trouble the engravers, but only if they're good at carving 3s on little plates. So Mr. Case, you took Bosporans, which is an interesting list because it's impetuous heavy cavalry, which used to be the magic bullet against cataphracts, but now cataphracts get impact as well, so they're possibly not as good as they were against that, but still against other things. And you've managed to cook up a list that's got 9 I believe, impetuous heavy cavalry in it, and a fascinating 1 in the second command and 4 in the first one. And it seems straightforward. But talk us through your list on this one and your list design here.
So the 4 in the first and third command are also elite.
Okay. Yep.
Which makes a big difference.
That's a big difference, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
So there's a choice to go early where you get sort of Greek foot and a command of 2, or later where you get Roman foot and a command of 3. And I decided to do that partly because I like the look of 4 medium sword impact to go, because obviously the heavy cavalry is great, but it's useless in terrain. So now
they're kind of mock auxilia then, are they? Or actually
they are. At that period, the Bosporan kingdom was a Roman client kingdom, so they were trained and modelled by Roman military advisors to basically be auxilia. So the design is that you put the ally in the centre with 4 impetuous elite heavy cavalry and a screen that you can throw forward of bow. On their open wing, you have something very similar, but with an extra medium cavalry bow to give you something that you've got a bit more control over. And then hopefully either one wing or the center is full of terrain, and that's where the large command goes. It's got 5 battle troops and 2 light foot javelins, so that's 7 terrain troops, all of which are pretty handy. And then a little bit of cavalry, a medium cavalry bow, and an impetuous heavy cavalry, just so that if you're facing another pure medium foot, you've got something that will give them a hard time as soon as they're in the open. And the big problem with it all weekend was that out of 5 games, the ally was unreliable 4 of the 5 games. So
that's awkward, isn't it? That's tricky.
It is, and it really, because it just slows down. It's not the death knell, and in many cases they were triggered, but often quite late. And I always played it quite defensively. I had most of the heavy cavalry starting almost on the baseline. That works quite well because the whole point is they're very vicious, but a little bit brittle. So you want to be able to time your blow and then concentrate and really pour all of that effort on a narrow frontage.
I must admit, that was my kind of huge first question with this list is, are you just ideally racing 8 impetuous elite heavy cavalry at someone before they get a chance to react, or are you doing something slightly cleverer than that with it?
Often you are doing that. Sometimes you're actually stacking them, 3 and 1 or 2 and 2, depending on whether the other guy's got supporting heavy foot with his flanking troops. But you can also redeploy a lot. Sometimes 4 of those heavy cavalry are moving over to support the medium foot sometime. But the point is, with 6 light horse, and sometimes with the 2 medium cavalry bows supporting them, you're pushing a screen a long way forward. And then with the rest of the troops, you're able to move from side to side. I was quite often defending, and so quite often I'd have the medium sword quite forward in a plantation ambush. That worked quite well several times. I was able to beat Julian because I was fortunate, because he threw his camels forward a bit too early with not quite coordinating support. And the 8 heavy cavalry beat the 6 impetuous medium camels just by weight of armor and being elite, really.
True.
I came a cropper against Dave, really because I was unable to deploy a third of the army until too late in the game, and he was able to chew me up at the edges before I got going. So I think it is a strong list, but it needs very careful play because, as I say, the heavy cavalry, even though they're armored and elite, they're quite brittle, and not being able to bowl over heavy swordsmen and medium foot quite as easily, particularly if they're supported, means I think it's a list that's weaker under version 4 than version 3. I enjoyed playing with it, but I'm not sure I'm going to be in a hurry to play with it again.
Yeah. Do you think, because obviously this was the first version 4 competition and people are sounding out rear support and things like that. Did you come away from sort of games against people who could have rear support, and let's say Romans for that, with people thinking, actually, I should have, like Dave said, I should have spent points on rear support, and then once people know what they're doing, they'll spend less on artillery and more on rear support, and this list will become less effective?
Well, no, because, I had a couple of games. The good thing is you're not impetuous against heavy foot. So quite often I would park 2 or 3 heavy cavalry in front of Romans, and we'd be in a Mexican standoff. He didn't really want to attack me, but I didn't really want to attack him. And often he had more points tied up watching me than I had. Yeah. So I could then outman him.
So does the rear support only work then if you stand to receive a charge?
Yes.
Yes, fine. Yes. Oh, okay. Wow. So you can't even wade in with it.
Yeah. No. And when you attack medium swordsmen with rear support, if you're armored and elite, you tend to still win, but rather than winning at contact, it might take you 3 rounds.
Yep.
But that's where things like the artillery and a few bowmen are needed by those foot to counteract the mounted, because the mounted then doesn't like to stand in front of those kind of troops and just be shot.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay, Dave, what do you think of this one? What's your thought on it?
I really quite like it. I think it's quite flexible. Although you've got a low command control, you've only got an initiative of 3. As long as you get the pips, and I understand Richard saying that you didn't get it with the ally, but then the ally can just sit there to some extent. But Richard's right. The secret with this army is manoeuvre with the cavalry and use the medium foot to try and win you the game, I think. And also you've got plenty of light horse. I think it's a really flexible army, depending on getting pips to some extent. But
is this one of those where you're deploying your heavy cavalry on the baseline rather than on the starting line almost all the time?
Well, I tend to deploy it maybe 2 in rather than 5 in, so that, if your light horse is 7 in, you can still wheel the formation behind the light horse screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really good. And there's one thing.
It's almost this the return of the DBM Rightigate Patrician Roman. Was that your kind of in the back of your mind when you were putting this together? Because indeed in ADLG you've just got less time to do that often to redeploy things.
I mean, I was looking for an army with impact cavalry, but in the Western world there isn't one in this period. So this was as close to it as I could get. So it is being a steppish type army, where you're doing that, where your light horse is there to maybe do a few hits, but it's really there to give your heavy cavalry the space to double move, because you're keeping the enemy 4 away from your heavies. While once the enemy is deployed, if he's got heavy foot, he's usually more committed than you are. And so you can then maneuver. And quite often, I was able to skirmish a third of the enemy's forces out of the game. It's just a classic game of concentration, basically.
Yeah, with the impetuous elite. Okay.
And they either work or they don't.
Yeah. And is it sort of supported heavy foot is kind of the nemesis of this army then? Or because I also came across quite a few elephants as well, I think.
Yeah, I'm not worried by elephants, because I dismount as impetuous armed heavy spear, and quite honestly, I'm quite happy to have a go at that.
Yeah,
I didn't have the opportunity to dismount once. I think as long as you're careful with it, it's a pretty good army. I think I didn't face any all medium foot type armies where I think this would be, a real rock to their scissors. But as I say, its problem is if somebody else has a large army and they can box you in, then you can get ground down, because it's all about trying to break through quickly. I mean, when I was playing against Paul Dawson, he almost managed to close a wing down with his heavy foot sort of supporting his heavy cavalry, but I was just able to squeeze through in time. But again, you sit in front of the Romans with four elite impetuous heavy cavalry, and the Roman doesn't really fancy his chances at taking you on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Interesting third place list.
This means war.
So we're now into the second place competition finisher, and this is Dave Allen, who was leading the competition, this sort of cataphracty competition with quite a cataphracty Parthian army. I think he did well to nip in early doors and grab this one. And so his list was a surreally small, and we think this is the correct list. We're not entirely sure, but it's pretty damn close. So there's a light foot bow and a cataphract elite general. That's your I'm deploying this first and not telling you anything because I'm clever. First command. Then a competent general with the 2 camelfracts, 2 medium swordsmen, 2 bowmen, 2 light horse, 2 light foot. So that's I guess, 2 camelfracts is still quite a thing. And then you're throwing 5 cataphracts into the final command, 3 of them elite, 2 medium cavalry bow, 2 light horse bow, and a light foot bow as well. So this is very much 8 camelfracts and cataphracts, isn't it? Which is just a big number. It's a lot of the table covered by cataphract shaped things. I don't know, Dave, do you want to start us off talking about this one?
Well, I think you're right about, it's become a bit of a fashion to have a micro command, as I call it, with a general included in some. This has gone to the uttermost extreme by just having 2 units in it. But I'd see that's job is just to go chasing around the table, manoeuvring to try and get round flanks and having the pitch to do it. I guess the brilliant general with the mass of cataphracts is the sort of command which holds the most of the table and splits into 2 commands, uses the medium cavalry and the light cavalry as a separate command. That's good. One thing I see in this, which I think is really clever, is I'm thinking Dave Allen's thinking about using brush, because then he can put his camelfracts and his medium sword together through terrain. So if he's in the desert or something like that, I'm just trying to look at the list. He can't choose to have desert in Parthian, can he?
No, I'm just trying to think which list you get, or which terrain types you get brush in.
You get them in forest, mountains, steppe, and desert.
All right, so that's a reasonable spread then, isn't it? You could choose to attack people bizarrely in forest, but there might be some people you can attack in steppe and desert as well. Which
really does that second arc command with the camelfracts, the medium sword, the bowman. That's a really, really powerful rough terrain command if you've got the opportunity.
That really rocks, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's completely reliant on the cataphracts, but in this competition there wasn't much to really scare the cataphracts. All right, the Seleucids have got decent elephants, but most of the other elephants in the competition were mediocre in the Roman armies and things like that. So
those two camelfracts give you the edge against other cataphracts as well, don't they?
Yeah. So I think they're the secret weapon of this command, which is what Iñaki used the Aramaeans, because there used to be 3. That's been reduced to 2 to sort of pin that army down. I think it's actually got, considering its command is only 3, it's got quite a bit of flexibility in it, actually, weirdly enough. And I think that micro command actually adds to its flexibility.
Yeah, and I think actually it should be 4 medium cavalry bow.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Wow. Okay, that's even more so.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it's very much, one quite wide and capable list for the open half of the table, a vicious terrain one, as long as it doesn't have to play on plains where there's no brush, and a micro command. It is on the smallish side of things, and that's its only vulnerability. And obviously, if somebody's able to bring to bear shooting against the medium cavalry bow, they can be a bit vulnerable.
Yeah, but four of them's quite a lot, isn't it? Unless you're armored Sassanids, that's quite a lot to start shooting at, especially if they're screened.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's two big commands, and no matter what happens, I guess your first command is going down first and telling the opponent nothing at all. Then your second command, that's probably going down second and aiming at terrain, because that's where it's going to go, isn't it? There's not anywhere else for that to go. So you're deploying almost all of your army last, and it's two commands in one. So even how you deploy that command is pretty flexible. Which goes left, which goes right. Do they mix up? All sorts of different. You can even use cataphracts and cavalry together as a sort of anti-cavalry kind of weird combo, and use two different commands there as well. So that's pretty solid. But it is all about how many cataphracts can I fit in this list, and the answer is 8.
I think it creates another question which was interesting in this competition is, up till now with version 3, almost every time you play, if you win the initiative, you elect to attack and trying to get the jump on the other person, and it means you get to see the opponent's army. I think, interesting enough, the change is somewhere, I don't know how this has quite happened, but it's made defending in your own initiative much more...
See, that's something I found. Well, my army was very rough terrain dependent, but no, I definitely found, partly through Hobson's choice, that defending felt like a real choice actually this time.
Yeah, I've definitely. I mean, I thought hard about playing Julian's army because I knew I was playing it on Sunday morning, and one of the choices I decided to take was to defend. If I won the initiative, was to defend in my own choice of terrain. And when it came to it, I went, no, go with the version 3 tactic and attack. And it was a mistake. It was a thorough mistake.
Yeah, interesting. All right then. Well, look, you've mentioned Julian, so let's crack on and look at the final top place list.
This means war.
So look, we're here with the top place list, and I think this is a bit of a head scratcher. Now, am I correct in thinking both? Well, I am correct. Both of you managed to play it. Obviously, I was never highly enough placed to do so, but you guys will have seen this and seen how it works. And this is the one that, and it was Blemi or Nobades, and we believe it's Nobades, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, very definitely. So
the camels are impetuous.
The camels impetuous. So that's what it's about, really. You've got one command, 6 warriors on camels, medium cavalry impetuous, 2 medium spearmen, 2 bowmen. So that's 10 in one command. And then 2 almost identical commands, 2 heavy cavalry, 2 medium cavalry, 2 medium spearmen, 2 bowmen, a light foot bow, and a light horse javelin in one. And then the other one's got 1 heavy cavalry, 2 medium spearmen, 2 bowmen, light horse javelin, light foot bow. So there's nothing elite in it. There's no heavy foot in it. It's using heavy spearmen. Those, I'll call them flanking commands. The 2 near identical commands have basically got 3 or 4. Well, actually, no, one's got 4 and 1 heavy cavalry, medium cavalry, and lights. The other one's got 1 and 1, so it's almost nothing. And then they seem to have 2 medium spearmen and 2 bowmen, and the main command's got 2 medium spearmen. How the hell does this work, really? How does this look effective?
Well, I think partly I think it was Napoleon's quip about, quantity has a quality all of its own. So you don't have much command and control, but it's very big and it's pretty maneuverable apart from the impetuous camels. So against my mainly mounted army, the foot is alternating, be a spear, bow. And in one command, it's backed up by enough mounted that if it's facing a pure medium foot command, it can boss it. And equally, the shooting helps it boss an opponent's mounted command. And if it's facing enemy heavy foot, it can just lurk in terrain. So your problem is getting, I think each of the elements are quite easy to beat if you can get at it, and if you can get at it in terrain that suits you and not your opponent. But doing that is quite hard.
Yeah, so I suppose if you count bowmen as combat troops, you've actually got a frontage of 23 things which are not light in this army, which is the whole bloody table, really, isn't it? It just fills the whole thing. So was this about medium spearmen being better? How much of that is this a factor, or was this just sheerly about numbers and you're fighting a mattress and you're sort of getting squished into it?
It's just a delivery system for the camels, really.
Well, except that the camels will often not win. You know, the camels will not beat heavy foot. They will often not beat good mounted. You know, cataphracts or good cavalry will normally beat the camels, but the camels tend to mesmerize you because they're large and they throw out that panic effect. But, you know, their job is to pin the center of the enemy while the two flanks overwhelm you. And if you're lucky with the camels, great. But you know, I won because I destroyed the camels.
Yes.
Before my flanks were overwhelmed.
That's my point. It's a delivery system for the camels. The camels are going to win you the game.
I think it's the opposite. I think the camels will usually lose you the game. The camels are there to fix a large amount of the enemy's center, which often has some of his best troops, while your large flank commands overwhelm. You know, if you're facing up to 5 in your opponent's flank or whatever, you're normally overwhelming them. So I think it's a very strong list, and you know, you have to be quite clever to design it, but once it's designed, I think you can play it quite conservatively and be successful. But a lot of it isn't quick kill, and so it's winning on attrition by having a battle frontage of 23.
So Richard, that sounds like a story of your game against it. Dave, what was your game against it like? How did it play in that game?
I think my first mistake was to attack it, thinking, I can get the jump and I'll get to see where his army. Richard very kindly warned me the camels were coming down the centre. That was fairly obvious. I thought that my cavalry command was not strong enough to take on the camels, even with the backup of the cataphracts. And I was hoping to sort of combine that with the medium foot. He negated my medium foot, as Richard says, by weight of numbers on one flank. When I tried to manoeuvre the cavalry, I threw lots of wands and didn't have pips for it. I did get it out at one point. I did get my legionaries in front of the camels, but then there's only 4 legionaries fighting 6 camels, and he was able to hit with 2 camels while the other 4 went down the centre of the table past. And that, you know, he used that to take the camp and take my light horse out of the game. He threw a 6 on the terrain to remove a very large plantation. If that had been on the table, that would have been... My plan was to sort of try and fill the table with plantations and fields, which the camels don't work in. And then I thought, my legionaries can go through a field and still take on medium infantry. Okay, I lose a factor, but I don't mind. You know, it's the same thing with impetuous heavy foots and legionaries. They're still good enough in terrain to fight other troops. That was my plan. Giving him the initiative, giving him the terrain choice was the wrong move, because what he did was say, right, I'm going to take the 2 plantations, make them really tiny, take 2 fields, make them really tiny, and that negated my ability to, you know, stop his camels with terrain, which was my mistake.
Because Julian's notes that he posted on Facebook was saying that the terrain is largely irrelevant, which
Yes.
suggests that it is about numbers. And then the countermeasure to the list is just to basically barrel down 1/3 of the table or a half on the table and just punch it really hard and just use its width and its unmaneuverability against it. So, playing it, do you think that would have worked with your army if you just concentrated and just gone for one piece of it really hard?
That was my plan as well, but because he removed that piece of terrain, that I ended up with nowhere completely safe for my medium infantry to hide in. So I ended up putting him on one side where there was terrain, and then he could gang up with a larger command on it. So he negated my medium infantry.
Maybe that's a question about support then, isn't it? Yeah, that's about exactly. Yeah.
If the infantry had support, they could probably have taken on the camels to some extent,
or any of his cavalry really as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it allows those medium infantry to operate in the open. Well, maybe that's so if we look at all these things then, sort of our version 4 learnings then, working backwards, that probably is one. Support is definitely worth the points. Integrated artillery, probably not. Certainly not 2 of them. The cheaper cost of medium swordsmen definitely isn't a game breaker. I don't think. Defending, I think all 3 of us seem to think that defending is more of a viable option now than it was for some reason, whether that's the terrain rules or something else that we've not quite put our finger on. Are those all fair points to say so far?
100%.
Yes.
Rear support is an absolute no-brainer now.
Yeah. Any other things that you're thinking, sort of, V4 out of these 5 lists that we've looked at that are kind of interesting?
I think one of my points is, whereas when I've ever played with version 3 and even this competition, I've ended up using a cavalry wing, an infantry wing, and a medium. But I think that's what I call the French way of playing, to have mixed commands with heavy foot. Now in reflection, I'd probably take the Romans without a cavalry wing, but put some of the cavalry into other commands, stiffen up the medium foot with a couple of cavalry, maybe. Put one cavalry with the lead for me is just to spin out.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's probably, I don't know, it sort of feels like listening to all of these that there's more of a role for a couple of bowmen now. So if rear support is going to mean that there's some more Mexican standoffs, possibly there is a role for a bowman with infantry as well, just to break those standoffs. Whereas before, the cavalry would just have a punt at something, perhaps a bit more.
I think it'll be particularly interesting when you bring in the Eastern armies or the later armies, where you can have crossbows or longbows to negate some of the benefit of the heavy armor for things like cataphracts and heavy knights. I think definitely. And guess what? That drives you to more historical compositions of, heavy spears, which may or may not be supported, backed up by some missile power, with some mounted with them. So that's what I think is good, because the rules now drive you towards more historical orders of battle.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's got to be a win, hasn't it? For sure. Okay. Well, look, I think on that note, we've run through 5 lists in fairly short order, which is good. Had a look at the ones which have done well, the ones which have not done so well. Picked up a few version 4 hints. So some of these things, I guess, will be tested in the next competition. Well, no, there's a competition actually up in Scotland this weekend coming, which I think has got a slightly broader thing. Then there's Entoyment, which some of us are doing down in Bournemouth in a few weeks' time as well. So it's all interesting. It's all change. It's all pretty positive change, and some new stuff coming out. So I think on that note, we will let you go back to reading the rules and reading the lists and flicking them over. And I wonder who's going to be the first person to wear out their army list book and need to buy a second copy. But we'll leave you on that note, and we will see you again for another list podcast soon. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
This means war.
record it. Good, that's excellent as well. So, I can't remember how we do this.
You're in a theatre on your screen, Tim.
I am, yes. Yeah, this is just to make it a bit more exciting now that we're back at doing this. There's all sorts of options, so here I am. So 3, 2, 1.
This means war. This means war.
Did he really have one Cataphract and one light foot together?
Yes.
That's taking micro commands to a new absurd level.